Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Parker, and I'm the Chief Communications Officer at American Promise. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Beyond the Headlines, where we take a look at money in politics and how that's changing American elections. As always, I'm joined by my colleague, Brian Boyle. Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and the topic of today's episode?
Hey, Jenny, great to see you. And hi, everybody out there. I'm the Chief Program Officer and General Counsel at American Promise. And I really look forward to these conversations with Jenny because sometimes our day to day is like we're so steeped in the details of what's happening right now. But it's nice to take a step back and kind of contextualize the work that we're doing in some of the broader themes of American history. So excited to dig in today. And if I could just say a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. As hopefully most of you know, Utah became the 23rd state last year in March of 2025 to formally call upon Congress to propose a constitutional amendment that addresses money in politics. And one of the partners in that work in Utah that American Promise really got to know really well was the Sutherland Institute, which is a conservative think tank in Utah, really grounded in constitutional principles and conservative principles. And they became a big champion of our work. And as part of that, they recently published, this week actually, they published a new report that digs into how the way our campaign finance system has evolved over the recent decades, how that has interfered with states' ability to make some choices about how they govern themselves. So that's kind of the high level topic of the report, and I think we're going to dig into a little bit today.
Okay, great. So give us just a little bit more over the long view about how this report shows us how American elections have changed over time.
Yeah, so what I think is really distinctive about this Sutherland report is that it focuses on the perspective of states, right? I mean, we're the United States, we have 50 individual states, and under the original constitutional design, those states were actually supposed to have some flexibility to make choices that might differ from state to state, right? There wasn't an expectation that every state would be a carbon copy of the other, and in fact, it was thought to be a virtue that there would be diversity across the states in various areas. But what has happened is that because the Supreme Court really took over the particular area of campaign finance and kind of nationalized it and created a one size fits all approach, states' ability to experiment or depart from whatever the Supreme Court's policy views are has really been stymied. And I think this report centrally focuses on how that has played out, not only over time, but in particular states that have tried to do things and then basically been slapped down by federal courts.
So there's a term that comes up in this report time and time again, and honestly, it's a term we're seeing in the headlines today, and that's federalism.
Yep.
So let's take a step back because that's not going to be a term that everybody recognizes right away. What is federalism and why is it so important to the great American experiment we call self-governance?
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about federalism because I think it's one of these underappreciated gems in the whole design of this American experiment. If you go back and you look, you read the Federalist Papers and you look at what the founding era thinkers were trying to do when they established our constitutional system, federalism, which is the idea that there are actually going to be different states, but then some overarching unifying national government, that federalism component was crucial. And if I could just say a little bit about why. The founders, first of all, they anticipated that America would grow to be a geographically dispersed country and also a very populous country. Populous, like a lot of people. And so they understood that maybe like direct democracy where everybody's living under the exact same system could work in what they thought of as the small republics of ancient Rome. But in a big country, you were actually going to need to have some variation. You were going to have to allow for geographic communities to go their own way in different areas. And so federalism was really meant to distribute power and self-governance across the states so that everybody wasn't living under one uniform national policy in all areas. So I would say part of it was about making self-government more real and connected to the people. But the other part was the founders were really concerned about concentrated power. And they specifically wanted the states to have authority over different aspects of power so that it wouldn't get too centralized because they were very concerned about centralized power. I mean, the revolution was basically sparked by what they felt was an overweening centralized power based in England and in the monarchy, and they needed to depart from that. So federalism was going to help guarantee and protect individual liberty by making sure power didn't get too centrally concentrated.
Okay, wow. So walk us through how the federal courts then came to play such a big role in how money in politics works, even at the state and local level. When and how did that happen?
Yeah, so first, it's important to just state that for the first 200 years of American history, decisions about whether and how to regulate money in politics were really primarily left to the states for state elections, and then Congress had a role for some federal elections. But then in 1976, 50 years ago, in a case called Buckley versus Valeo, the Supreme Court injected itself into the domain of campaign finance. And it did so basically, in its theory was we are construing and implying and interpreting the First Amendment, which, as everybody knows, the First Amendment is a constitutional provision that applies across jurisdictions. And that's, to your point, Jenny, like why is the Supreme Court decision affecting states? Well, it's because if the Supreme Court says the First Amendment forbids certain types of regulation, that applies not just to the federal government, but it applies to state and local governments as well. And so that was the key move or inflection point was when the Supreme Court said, we're going to treat all campaign finance regulations as if they are regulations of speech itself. That put the court in the driver's seat, and it also put all political units within the nation at the state and local level under the court's view, right? So now all the states have to basically follow whatever the court says about campaign finance.
So what does this practically mean for voters and lawmakers at the state level when it comes to campaign finance?
I mean, in a nutshell, it means that a lot of decision-making power has been stripped away from the American people and from state lawmakers. And if I could just give like one or two examples to illustrate how this has played out. Because the Supreme Court has taken over this area, it has also taken over, like, it has basically policed what types of justifications you can even have for a campaign finance law. So according to the Supreme Court, the only justification for a campaign finance regulation is to prevent like what they call quid pro quo corruption, or, money in exchange for a political favor or a legal outcome. But states over the course of American history have been concerned about other ways in which money in their political system can have a corruptive influence, not just about quid pro quo, but the domination of outside interests, the domination of even foreign interests, the interest in self-determination so that, for example, Alaska's elections aren't being overrun by outside money. And the federal courts have said those other interests don't count. If you pass a law because you're worried about outside influence in your elections, that's not legitimate in our view. And so we're going to strike it down. And, Florida has tried to pass some laws to stem outside influence in its ballot elections. Maine has done the same for not just foreign corporations, but also foreign governments. And that law got hung up in the courts. And so we're left with a situation where states feel that they would like to do certain things to protect the integrity of their electoral process. But the court has said, sorry, we're not going to let you do that.
So this report is titled Freeing the States on Campaign Finance.
Yeah.
Talk to us about what freeing the states would require and what it doesn't require.
Yeah, I mean, it really is about freeing the states, not telling the states what to do, not telling the states how to exercise this power, right? I mean, at American Promise, we don't take any positions on campaign finance policies itself. Neither does the Sutherland Institute report. It doesn't say states should regulate in the following ways. It simply says states should have the freedom to decide for themselves and also the freedom to try something and then see if it's working the way that they thought, see if it's protecting their elections the way they anticipated. Maybe it's not, right? I mean, or maybe the effects change over time and you need to update or change, or maybe there's a new 21st century threat to the integrity of elections that the state didn't anticipate 50 years ago. It just frees them to make policy, set policy, change policy, and adapt in a way that currently they aren't free to do.
Yeah, so let's dive a little bit more into that about the idea of state level experimentation and innovation, and why that's important to our experiment in self-governance and why it's important to this issue, which you just touched on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact is there will always be a tendency for moneyed interests to seek to influence political outcomes. I mean, that's I think it's human nature. I think it's just a reality of how political systems, the pressures within political systems. And so given that reality, I don't think it means that states have to say, well, that's just the way it is. Money's always going to try to seek to find a way to influence our elections, and we just kind of have to let it happen and be passive. No, states should have the ability to say, you know what, we're worried in particular about this. We think this is really having a corrosive effect, so we're going to try to tweak this or set this guardrail. And that's, in a nutshell, what our amendment would try to do. I think that's one of the reasons the Sutherland Institute specifically mentions the 4R Freedom Amendment as an important constitution level solution to this problem, because it clearly gives states the power to make these choices for themselves. And then once that's part of the Constitution, you kind of don't have to worry about the courts interfering going forward. Now, that experimentation is important because, I mean, we're all reading in the news about, for example, advances in artificial intelligence, right? Who knows how those tools are going to be leveraged, first maybe by human actors, but second maybe by themselves. Like it's kind of crazy. Some of these tools seem to be gaining a level of autonomy that is surprising folks. And I don't know about you, but I think if a state is concerned about the role of an artificial entity in its elections, it should absolutely have the power to set policy around that.
Okay, this is really fascinating. It sounds like a really important report. Thanks so much for chatting today about it.
Yeah.
And thanks to everybody who joined us today. If you're interested in the Sutherland Report, you can find it in our newsroom. If you want to learn more and stay tuned about our progress on the 4R Freedom Amendment, follow along here and come visit us at americanpromise.net.
Thanks, Jenny. Good chatting with you.
Thanks, Brian.
Bye.